Hello, and welcome to the final game in my CantCon tourney recap. So far, we've gone undefeated against Starco, Free Company of the Star, and Vanilla Ariadna in Frostbite and Acquisition respectively, and we have indeed managed to, after the 10-zip victory in round 2, scrape together not just enough tourney points, but enough objective points to propel us into the finals against the currently undefeated 20-zip Spiral Core player. For this matchup, I chose the same list I had played in round 2, basically as a mark of respect for my opponent, because I know how to play this list really well, and I was totally unprepared to play an experimental Anathematic Sepsitor list in him in the finals of an event. Beyond that, though, I like this as a list against Spiral Core. It's not trying to do the things that Spiral Core is effective at stopping. So, for example, it's not trying to infiltrate speculos into the deployment zone, where Spiral Core have a variety of pieces that are very effective at stymieing your attacks with those. And by that I mean Helots, obviously with their effective 360 while in camo, Carry Sentinels, who are great at sniffing out speculos, a variety of Ferroware, which is very good at triaging a speculo attack, and Symbiomates, which just make it hard for the speculo to go all in on a piece that's particularly important. My opponent also quite likes using Mine Layers in limited capacities as well. It's not trying to use TO Camo, which a Tagma Sniper would effectively stop. And in fact, this list has white noise, really good white noise, the highest whip white noise in the game, which can make engaging a Tagma Sniper, if my opponent does not tri-core link it, really, really easy. You just put down white noise and the Raicho goes in and cleans it up in like one face-to-face roll. The presence of the Raicho as well actually is just kind of nice, because it's good enough to take a face-to-face roll against a Tagma Sniper, even if the Tagma is core linked. You can take that a couple of times, ride your BTS, and just be solid. So, all in all, this list is good. And, as we'll see, it's got a good guided missile capacity, which can be really important if your opponent's defense is genuinely immaculate. So, it's a fine list, a good list for quadrant control, where it can move a number of quite expensive pieces into zones, including far zones, relatively quickly. The Raicho only has so many orders, but it can move if it needs to. And it's got a lot of impetuous for moving into your own zones. And the fact that I've put an Icadron in the list this time is kind of clutch as well. So I feel good about this list, but I feel good about this list into literally every matchup and every scenario. Short of Biotech 4, there's basically nothing that I think this is bad in, and I don't hate it in Biotech 4 either. This is my opponent's list, and I like it a lot. There's a couple of like flourishes in here actually that are really interesting. The Kriegel in Group 2 is pretty experimental, but I think it's really cool. The rest of it we'll go through sort of piece by piece. But the thing about the Kriegel is that the Ferro Booster is an underrated fire support weapon. It's only burst 2, but because it is a comms attack, cover is not effective against it, which means that it's always on full damage, not modified by cover, and it's hitting on 16s against targets without mimetism. And a burst 2 good range band hitting on 16's weapon is a great support piece of opportunity. Given it costs no SWC, it's not too expensive, and it is bringing otherwise a Razor and Mirror Ball. Just having that as a Group 2 piece to like clean off Libertos that end up in the open, or try and kill Tigers, etc. There is nothing wrong with that. That is kind of cool. It's got a Clipsos boarding shotgun, which my opponent will use to good effect in this game, but in particular, that's a quadrant control tech piece. You want it in a position where it can just scooch across a line and be 24 points in a zone that your opponent doesn't think you could have. And indeed, the last time I played quadrant control was against my opponent, not running this list, and he was using Clipsos Sniper that game. And he scored 3 points on the first turn just by doing that, moving half of an inch and being, in that case, 26 points in a zone I didn't expect, 3 points. Carry Paramedic is great. It's probably one of the best paramedics in the game not linked, having native +1 burst, and which means that it has a good chance of scoring 2 hits and therefore making the paramedic roll really likely. In addition to being just a kind of useful tech piece, because of its defensive kit. It's got the MSV1 and the Sixth Sense and the Biovisor, which means that against a combined army, if your opponent's getting fresh and running a Speculo Killer, you've got a good active counter to it. And then 2 Helots with light rocket launchers and submachine guns. They're fantastic. Diplomatic delegate, she's fantastic. That's just a great group 3. A great group 2. Group 1 is also really a testament to how my opponent here has learned to play Spiral. Now, the Dral, the AP Marksman Rifle, it can be linked, but it's not going to be in this case. It's going to be by itself, and it's going to be a piece of opportunity. Now, we won't see it in this game because of a few things that happen early on, but Dral unlinked can be very, very effective. So what he does with his links, he ends up using the first link that he forms is the Tricor Tagma, the Tagma with Viral Sniper, and then something else. With Nima, the Kosael, and well, I want to say a Kriegel. But that will get flipped around, and being agile with your Spiral Core links is a real skill to learn. Very often, particularly so, for example, if you Tricor your Sniper, your opponent is going to have to deal with that Sniper and will usually end up killing it because it is just a single wound piece. You might be able to bring it back. Shock Immune is a relevant rule on Tagma. But if they don't, you've got to have your deployment position in a way where you can reform everything and jump around with your links. Really, really pivot your offense if you need to. And that's something that I need to learn in Toha, incidentally, but my opponent is really, really good at with Spiral. So you can sort of see some draft links kind of laid out in that list. They were immediately abandoned and reformed because he recognized that I would have white noise, and so he needed the core link bonuses on the Tagma. Now, in this instance, my opponent won the roll, and he elected deployment, and I could not risk... I did not know that he didn't have a Greif in this list, but even so, I couldn't really risk letting him go first. I think if I played this game a million times under similar conditions and had a time chamber to practice in, I might reach a point where, knowing his list, I could go second, deploy first. But you have to be very, very sure of a matchup for that to happen, and I was not in this case. And the potential punish I wasn't willing to risk, so out the gate we're going to be aggressive here and try and lay the hurt into my opponent. Now, a quick note for these photos. These were taken at the end of my first turn, which is why there is a Raicho halfway up the board, but we'll get to that. This was the deployment zone I had to work with. Now, actually, although the fact that it's mostly made from old terrain, I quite like how this table has come together. I actually really like what the map builder has done with it. This, I think, has been bumped. This used to be, at the beginning of the game, this is sitting like this up against the deployment edge. This table layout makes really good use of the fact that there are ladders on every single one of those boxes that you get in the old Corvus Belli terrain. So even though this looks like a single big piece of terrain that you couldn't possibly maneuver past because there's no alleyways, there is tons of mobility onto, over, and around this big piece. And the vault height there is perfect as well. So pretty much like 100% of this table is playable. The least playable space is probably this rooftop, because to get down off of it, you have to go back into the deployment zone. Everywhere else on the table, there's lots and lots of freedom of movement. And the way that the crates are spaced as well means that although there is plenty, the most open lines of fire are between pieces on the high ground, there's still lots of space to hide. So say this building here is higher than the ones around it, which means that you can hide quite comfortably on the roof behind it and be quite safe if you need to. So this is with quite limited pieces of terrain, literally just boxes that come in various Corvus Belli kits. This has made a really cool board. So how I'm setting up on this table, my opponent has selected this side, and I think because he recognizes how good a defensive position this Maginot line is here, he can nook in behind this with mines and turrets and ferroware. There's really, if I come up over this, I have to step into line of fire of helots, basically. And so he's used this to build ideal helot line of fire positions, with one helot there and then one helot there. Now, I have to deploy not knowing this, but I kind of recognize that he's going to build an incredibly tough defense. So what I set up to do is, firstly, to make my impetuous orders really useful. And one of the good things is I do a scout of his deployment zone, and I kind of confirm that there is, even if he's on this high ground, these buildings are high enough that I can safely set impetuous troopers up in the open. And so all of these Dararazi, I end up with one there, and one there, and they can all move forward in the impetuous phase very safely. The Tiger creatures do so as well. And what that means is that I'm using those impetuous orders to get points in zones because, and I have to heavily contest my quadrants because my opponent will try and find a weak point there. He's going second in quadrant control. What he wants is a situation where I'm not pushed forward into his zones, and he can move a link or even a 40-point draal into any of my zones that he wants and score those 3 points, build that lead. So I have to stop him from doing that. And I stop him from doing that by having, firstly, the Immatrons land intentionally. This one fails, but this one lands intentionally in a zone. Often, usually, I will try and land Immatrons in positions that are as safe as possible, like just, way, way back. But in this case, I'm electing to land them, and one of them passes, in a quadrant where they'll be worth points, and are as safe as I can make them. So I've got this Datarazi. The Icadron will deploy here, Bit and Kiss will deploy here, and that position is chosen very deliberately as well, where I want them to be able to move up around here or up around here, and put pitches down into this part of the table. And that's for very good reason. The Rideshow will eventually reserve drop here, and like the Samaritan's kind of in the middle, the Umber is over on this side. For my opponent's part, he builds that defense hell that I expected that he would. The Tagma Sniper actually comes down there and is it comes down there so that it can be Tricore linked with a Helot kind of directly underneath it. There's another Helot over here, and then there's a Draal and it's mine, and the Draal has a Symbio Bomb there. And then there are just lots and lots of Tricore linkable pieces on these rooftops. But, and this is important, they are all positioned so that a single missile will only ever hit one model. And that is step one of how you execute a successful missile defense. Otherwise, and probably the most notable piece that will come up later in the game, there's a delegate prone on this ledge here. So I'm going first, and I have to aggressively prosecute an offense without losing tons of things to do it. And Helots will punish you. If you do not respect a Helot, and your opponent has discipline in revealing them, it's just they are either a massive order sink or a volley of fire to make a face-to-face roll terrible. Usually one of two things will happen. You can make the discover shoot roll against a Helot and hope that you succeed. But many troops have mediocre willpower for that, so they just end up being an order sink. Or you can try and bait them out by pushing to engage something else and just wearing reburst in reactive against you as part of a firefight with something that's probably got burst 2. So you're just wearing 5 dice in ARO just to bait out a Helot, and neither of those are particularly appealing. So what I've chosen to do this game basically is execute a very inefficient attack against my opponent, and I'm going to be using guided missiles purely as a means of nullifying the massive defensive advantage my opponent has built. Now, it does help in this case. If I'd wanted to attack directly, the fact that I have Datarazi, which can push through an Eraser Net because they have veterans, is really good. So I could potentially have made some suicide attacks with Datarazi, but that would have been my other option, and with Tagas and with Libertos. But because it's Spiral Core, which are a Tohar offshoot, they are rich in wounds. So trying to do things like make attacks with chain rifles and chain colts has a really high chance of just injuring your opponent and not crippling them because it's Spiral Core. So this is genuinely, if this had hacking, it would be literally immaculate. You can crack this list with an avatar pretty comfortably because the Helots will miss most of the time. You've got to be willing to risk a fire template killing the avatar, but if that doesn't happen, this list you can roll over this list with the big boy. But short of that, this is a nearly immaculate defense. And as noted, I didn't play an avatar. I didn't want to, because I don't enjoy them. I think they're stressful to play as, and they're unsettling to play. They're basically unfun to play against because of the power level. So, my first turn, we've got all of the Impetuous, and then Bit and Kiss activate. Now, they have to clear the way, and then the Riot Show moves, and I faff very slightly here, putting some white noise down. Mostly just to move the Durantid, but I should have left that, because the Riot Show decides the game will not be too difficult for him this time. She moves to there, she engages the Tagma Sniper, and she double crits him. Cool. Alright, dead. Gone. One volley. This game does not have to be hard for that reason, so that's excellent. So this white noise was kind of wasted, but that's okay. So at this point, Bit and Kiss move up, and I am rewarded for my decision to put the Icadron in the list. because they just whiff the hell out of their first volley of pitcher shots. But because I am able to reload, I reload Kiss, so that reloads both of his. Bits only fired one of hers, so they can fire 3 more pitches. And after having fired 6 pitches on 14s, I land 2 of them, which is enough. I land 1 there, and I land 1 there. And at that point, I begin the missile strikes. So the Quadrant is whip 16, but actually, to get some models forward, I make at least one coordinated order here, where I coordinate some Datarazi, which is why this Datarazi is so far forward. Some Datarazi, the Umbra, and the Quadrant. And the first thing we do is we spotlight the Dral with the Symbio Bomb. And the reason why we do that is it is a perfect target for engaging. Even though it's got good dodges, it represents a lot of value, which I can potentially kill in 1 missile. And we do, I think. We knock it wounded in 1 missile and then dead with a second, after having spotlit it with coordinated orders. I don't actually have many orders left after that. I have very few, because it's inefficient to launch a guided missile attack. But I do have enough orders to Oblivion Nima Sitar. And the reason why I do that is spotlighting would be useless. She's got a Symbio Bomb, and Symbio Mate, and Symbio Mates are effective. Their total immunity and BTS, etc., are effective against comms attack. It's in the Symbio Mate rule. So she will no-sell the first spotlight against her. But, and now there might be... Yeah, no, just had to check that. Spotlight is non-lethal, so total immunity will no-sell it completely. Whereas if I use Oblivion, it has the highest damage. The Symbio Mate will kick in to stop the armor-piercing quality of Oblivion, but it's the highest damage program that will still cause an effect. Now, as a minor point of order, fuck this up too, because Oblivion is also non-lethal. But it felt like the best way that we could resolve the fact that the Symbio Mate effects works against hacking and is applied against comms attacks. We sort of played Spotlight like it was Forward Observer, and Oblivion like it was an actual attack. It's actually very possible that the correct way to resolve that was either one... The only way I think is wrong to resolve that is that Spotlight penetrates a Symbio Bomb, uses a Symbio Mate, uses it up, and also applies targeted. I think that's wrong. If that's wrong, then Oblivion, probably for consistently, should also totally bounce but use the Symbio Mate because it's non-lethal. But that feels kind of wrong too. So we sort of split the difference in this case, basically just off of how do we think this works, which is that Oblivion would have its armor-piercing quality negated but still apply. That is probably the wrong way to do it, but we were both comfortable with that resolution, and as it happened, it punched through the Symbio Bomb, despite the fact that it stopped it from being armor-piercing, and it isolated Nima. Now, there was an engineer nearby, there was a Kosale Pioneer, which will become important very quickly, but Nima basically would, and Nima can also reset out of that, but it was the sort of the most worthwhile thing to do based on how we were choosing to play Symbio Bombs in the moment. The remainder of this turn is spent basically making a decision, which is, do I make a big play for one of my opponent's zones? Because the Raicho is sort of about here at this point, and it's got enough orders left that it could run there if it wanted to. Now you can see from that picture, I have decided to do that, but it was a tricky decision to make, because if the Raicho dies, I have gambled much and gained nothing. But if I don't make that play, then I'm not ahead at all. I am accepting a stalemate. And if you remember in the first round, I didn't score maximum points. And I'm not 100% sure at this point how everyone else is doing. But I do know that if I only score a tie in this game, I am not going to win the event. So we make the big play, and the Raicho moves up to there. So my opponent has taken only a couple of casualties, realistically, right? He's had Nima isolated, he's lost the Dral, and he's lost the Tagma. Now, in terms of pieces to lose, those are significant, but he's not down. It's only 2 and a bit models. And in fact, Nima spends her regular order and clears isolation, just like that. Honestly, she needed to roll a 6. It's not a challenging roll. And I can't be mad. I made that roll with an arithmetic on a 4 in the first round, in the first game. So, good for Nima. She's a cool piece. I had at least used the Symbio Mate. At this point, my opponent kind of demonstrates the agility he has learned with his link teams. And we'll switch view for this because it's easier to understand from the side perspective. There are easily enough pieces here to reform a tricore. So he does. He reforms the tricore model, the Cosail Engineer, and I think Nima. The first thing he does is reveal that Clipsos. She's got a boarding shotgun. She sort of crawls prone to there, and she gats surprise shot, armor piercing, gats the Raicho. Now the Raicho lucks the hell out here, and actually wins the face-to-face roll. She rolls very, very, very low, and I roll very low, but not that low. And I dodge the Raicho to there to be in base contact, so I can survive further armor piercing rounds. At this point, my opponent reforms that tricore, and the Cosail Engineer moves to there. At this point, I would like to remind everyone that is now a tricore linked model with a K1 combi rifle, and I'm out of cover. And it lights me the fuck up. Now, the sole advantage I have here, which is not going to materialize, is that I've dodged to be about 17 inches from it. So it only needs 12s. It promptly rolls 2 or 3 of those in the first face-to-face roll. Which is pretty bad. But, despite being double crit, remember the Raicho is a crit immune tag. I do not win the face-to-face roll, but I do not take extra armor saves. And I pass all of them. I would almost certainly have failed a couple with more dice in the mix, but of the 3 rolls I had to take, I pass everything. At this point, I make a guts roll. I adjust my positioning so that everything is in line of fire. But this is a really awkward one, and I know what's going to happen. And I think in retrospect, I made the wrong call. So how I end up positioning the Raicho is I stay out of cover relative to the tricore because of the distance difference. And I have my line of fire something like that, facing this direction. It is the only way to have both of these pieces in my front arc. Which means that, and I know this is going to happen, but I'm willing to risk it, and I think in retrospect it was wrong to do so, the Diplo delegate stands up and flash pulses me in the back. Now I've got a turret over here, she takes a bunch of shots on the turret, needing ones to crit or something, and it whiffs them all, unsurprisingly. But the flash pulse succeeds. And I'm stunned. In retrospect, being stunned is the worst thing that could have happened. I would rather take unopposed shotgun shots than be stunned and have signed my death warrant. I luck the fuck out for the remainder of this turn. The K1 lights me up even further. I take a wound. The shotgun lights me up. I take a wound. But at this point, my opponent is just running shy of orders because he's done all of this, and I didn't cover this, but for reference, he's also had to destroy this repeater without getting himself even more spotlight. I think he's gotten spotlit by the K1 combi rifle, but he's been willing to accept that. But he knows he has to destroy this repeater, because if he doesn't, I'm just going to drop more missiles on him next turn. So he has to pause the attack and move something up to kill this. I can't remember what does it. I don't think it's a healot, but it might be. But something moves up to kill this. And he's just dangerously low on orders. And he's pumping basically 2 combat groups worth of shots into this Raicho, who is literally living only because of her crit immunity. She gets crit multiple more times by various different pieces. And at the end of the turn, she's on 1 wound. But she's not dead. Which means I score 3 points. Because he is not outpointing that Raicho, and I've comfortably got lots of points in my zones. But I'm very, very wounded. Now at this point, I kind of need to make a call as to what to do. The first thing is very easy. That Cosail is spotlit, so I fire a missile at it and kill it. I think it takes 2 orders. Boom. But from there, it's kind of tricky, because the repeaters are destroyed. And I could, and honestly, probably, but not certainly should have, just refueled, rearmed Bit and Kiss, dropped more pitches, dropped more missiles, and been very, very boring. But it was a very close run thing, because that's still an inefficient attack. And there is still a Clipsos here staring at my Raicho. And I kind of want to exfiltrate it. My other option, because the Tagma is dead, is to lay down smoke there, and get one of these Datarazi into melee with Eclipse to kill it. I end up choosing to do that, partly because I think preserving my resources might be better, and because I'm worried about I only have to lose a few pieces in this zone before the Clipsos and literally anything else can contest it for me. Here I've got the 39-point Umbra, and there's a Datarazi under there as well. That's a decent chunk of points, but those are resilient points, and they're not easy for my opponent to attack because the Drow is dead. But this area feels more. It feels like it's more vulnerable, and I don't want this Clipsos in my back. So I make the decision on that basis, and also not to just be kind of boring, to move the Datarazi up and over. Unfortunately, I fuck it up in the last move. So I get all of that smoke down, so it's covering kind of like all of that. Datarazi are really good at that. And I dodge Datarazi up and around to have a Berserk line onto the Clipsos. And what I don't do first and should have, is activate the Raichu and just move it. Just get it out of the way. And because I don't, when the Datarazi goes into CC, doesn't Berserk, doesn't need to. No, he does Berserk because I know my opponent will lay a template down, so I may as well just force the issue. My opponent lays a template down, which hits the Raichu and I fail its save. So for all of that, the poor damn thing dies anyway, having scored me 3 points. The good news is that Datarazi passes its save, and it'll end up just knocking down prone in that position on the building for the rest of the game. And hey, you know what? It turns out that Raichu pilots are fucking built. They have burst 5 assault pistols and combi rifles with BS-12. Holy shit. So she climbs out and fucking kills the delegate. She's not going to do anything else for the rest of the game, and I think the delegate combi rifles her. But yeah, it turns out that Raichu pilots are fucking awesome. I could feasibly, if I'd have realized how good she was before I moved, I might have taken that in combi rifle range, contesting the flash pulse, and run up around and killed a few things with that combat group. Probably should have. Kind of regret that I didn't, but I literally didn't look at her profile. I was remembering N3 and thought she had flamethrowers. No. Raichu pilots have got dual assault pistols. They're awesome. Must remember that for future. So what we do for the remainder of this turn, that uses up most of my orders. What we do for the remainder of the turn is the Icadron, which is in Group 2, uses pretty much all of the Group 2 orders to run up over here and prone on this rooftop. So that means I've got a Datarazi and an Icadron, which is quite a chunk of points in my opponent's zone. I also just sort of move the Torontid up, and I move some things around, and the Libertos, and like at this point I've got various different skirmishy warband elements sort of forming a line here. And I kind of just hope that it'll be enough. My opponent activates, and he starts his counterattack. And this is where we see the Thera Booster come into play, because it's able to just move out from its position here, where it had been watching for Rassiats, and just fire shots sort of into this area. And it doesn't win all the face-to-face rolls, but it wins a few of them, and it pushes models back, and it's just a really good Group 2 fire support piece. I am, at this point, trying to like dodge Tigers around and up and get the Libertos into a good position, and it's able to like effectively, it doesn't stop them, because I get some reasonably good dice rolls, but it's able to push them back, basically, out of line of fire, in a really useful way. However, my opponent is still kind of on the ropes. He's just running out of models. Even with the Raichu dead, he's too far back. And too many of his miniatures are like irregulars or non-combat troops. And particularly with the death of the K1 combi Kosail, who, very nearly, and should frankly have any other, like a Salamander, or a Lizard, or a Dragao, or a Squalos, all would have just died in one volley to that Kosail. Awesome tech piece to round out against Spiral's weaknesses. That Kosail, when it died to the missile, beheaded the Triad again. So my opponent is down on command tokens at this point. He can't reform. So basically what happens is that Nima, in an attempt to be points in zones, comes up and around to here, and the Helots move into position as best they can. And my opponent is, I think, Nima moves into this quadrant, and the 15-point Kael'thar back here moves up here as well, and that is enough to contest this zone against the pieces I have on this rooftop. But it's not enough to score points, so we nothing is scored this turn. But basically none of my stuff dies. And at that point, I collapse combat groups down so that the Quadrant has, like, he kills irregular troops, but nothing that is super major. I lose, like, I think one Tega and the Libertos, but those are replaceable losses. I have an irregular Tega here who will berserk up onto something in an impetuous order and then die. And the rest of this turn is the Gerontid show, where it moves around to here, over to there, around to here, shoots Nima, forces her back into cover, and basically he just stomps his way up the board. He takes a face-to-face roll and easily kills the Keltar Specialist back here, and then comes up onto this building with that ladder, engages and destroys Nima, up to here, engages and destroys the Tagma that is hanging out back there, and then he just settles in at 63 points in a zone with my opponent just with nothing left, basically. So he's sitting here. I got almost 100 points in this zone with the baggage. In fact, it's very, very close to 100 points sitting in this quadrant, thanks to baggage at this point. And there is enough left in this quadrant that my opponent is not going to be able to get models past me, and there's tons of points in this quadrant. And my opponent makes sort of like a desperate gamble, but he can't push through. I've got a Dadarazi that's hanging out here, securing the HVT, which is good, by the way, because I drew two Doctor classifieds. I couldn't do either of those, but I can secure the HVT. And that means that I've had two turns out of 3, going first, where I've had full control of the board, which puts me on 7 points, which is enough to major the round. And it also, as it happens, ends up putting me on enough tournament points and objective points overall to come first. So that sort of concludes our CantCon 2022 recap. Really happy with how the Gerontid list performed. Really happy in particular with the decision to include a Nicodron. It was very important, especially in the last game, where if I had not had the ability to reload, I would not have been able to persecute that offense. And my opponent actually asked at the end of this game, like, what is the defense against that missile stuff? So a couple of things to note. First thing is just to think about what I actually managed to kill. I killed 2 models against my Ariadne opponent with missiles, and I killed 1 model against Ed, and a second model on my second turn because he had not been able to clear Spotlight because some dice went badly and he didn't have an order spare. Realistically, I killed 1 model with it. The reason why missiles felt really powerful in these games is that they enabled me to prosecute an offense without engaging a very, very strong defense that my opponent had enacted. Now, to be fair, I didn't test the Ariadne defense, but like I mentioned, I got crit 5 times by that Tank Hunter in a previous game. I had no appetite for fighting the thing again. And Ed's defense was basically perfect. There is very little that I could have done if I had not had some asymmetric measure. I would have to have tried to trade warbands in, or risked a super heavy attack. I didn't want to do either of those because he's very, very good at defending. And defense, really good defense, on tables that enable good defense, you need a tool against it, and it just so happens that missiles are a fantastic tool. Specfire is also good, and there are some deployment zone crackers otherwise that work effectively, but I like missiles. But they're not high kill count weapons. They just feel really strong because all of your defensive preparations come to naught because they bypass it. Now, the way to deal with it is to go first and to eliminate the pieces that threaten you so that your defenses can be effective. But then your opponent's defenses come into full play. But Ed is a bit of a wizard with the Greif operator, and there are 2 pieces in this list that you can kill to effectively neuter the threat of missiles. The first is obviously the missile remote itself, and the second is Bit. If you kill Bit, and she can be the easier of the 2 to kill sometimes, then I have no pitches left, and I don't have any ability to heal her in this list, so you only have to knock her unconscious and you're good. If either of those 2 linchpin pieces dies, I can't drop missiles anymore, so that's an effective countermeasure. And Nomads can be kind of like this as well. Nomads have a wider range of ways to place repeaters, but if you can bypass those and kill the things that are causing you trouble, and it's not terribly difficult sometimes to do that. The Nomad repeater network can be a little more fragile than it looks. You can push through, and if you can kill the guided missile launcher, you're golden. Nevertheless, it's a capability that really, really saved my bacon in this game and was very useful in the second game as well against Ariadna. Otherwise, Tadarazi got to do melee things over the course of this event. We got to see the Chirontid come out and bully the board and be the super heavy infantry it was born to be. I love the 63-point Chirontid is my favorite of those profiles. All of them are kind of good. The MSV heavy machine gun is kind of a tech piece. It's really, really good against Ariadna, and it's kind of really not as useful when your opponent is doing things like using tags or super heavy infantry as an ARO piece. But when it's good, it's really, really good. Even the Sepsator Torontid is kind of cool. I increasingly find myself liking the Torontid more than the Anathematic. The cost difference is the main reason. The Anathematic is a true predator, but the Torontid is more reliable and cheaper. And that cost difference does things like afford me the Umbra Samaritan, which is genuinely a viable offensive piece, and a second hacker gives you really good hacking network tools. So overall, they're listed really well. I was super happy with the outcome of the event. I'm glad that I played combined. I think the Sheshkin anathematic list I played in the first round needs a bit more work before it's ready for competitive play. I kind of lucked my way through against my own bad judgment that game. But overall, if you've got any questions, drop them in the comments. Otherwise, stay tuned for more.